From introducing a girl to my son during his situationship, to inadvertently causing discord and his eviction, everything surprisingly culminated in a far better ending than I had anticipated. At the age of 50, I find myself in the midst of a perplexing and somewhat distressing situation involving my son's girlfriend, who has consistently been somewhat distant and cool towards me. My son and his girlfriend, both 25, have been dating for a while now, but the roots of the issue go back about 3 years to a time before they were officially a couple. Back then, my son was involved in what he described as a situationship with her. This term was new to me at the time, implying a relationship that was more than friendship but without clear commitment. He lavished her with luxurious gifts and frequently invited her over, yet when pressed, he admitted that they weren't officially together. She was an attractive online influencer, considering her options among several interested parties. About 7 months into this undefined relationship, I met a young woman through my work who seemed particularly smitten with my son. It was during a typical bustling afternoon at my small boutique, a place adorned with colorful fabrics and eclectic decorations that reflected my personal taste for the vibrant and unusual. Among my employees was a young woman, recently hired, who brought an infectious energy and a smile that could brighten even the dreariest days. As we arranged new stock one day, she casually mentioned her admiration for my son, having seen photos of him on my desk. Her interest piqued as she spoke of his achievements and hobbies, which I had shared in passing during our coffee breaks. My kid was in what he called a situationship with an internet influencer, which is an informal and seemingly open arrangement, so I saw no problem with putting him in front of someone who was obviously interested. After all, the influencer was still weighing her options among several suitors, and he had previously made it clear that the connection was not exclusive. Given the circumstances, I believed that giving this young lady my son's contact information, and urging her to give him a call was a harmless enough gesture. It could be fun for him to meet her. When I brought up the interaction with my kid later, his response was, at best, hesitant. With a vague, "Okay mom," and a non-committal shrug, he immediately changed the subject. There was no quick follow-up or spark of interest. It appeared to be just one more thing tucked away in the recesses of his memory, not important enough to take action on just now. My son's response was non-committal, and nothing immediate came of it, but eventually, he and the influencer formalized their relationship. However, as the months progressed, the dynamics of his relationship with the influencer began to shift. Whether my introduction played any role in this change was unclear, but about 3 to 4 months later, he and the influencer decided to commit to each other officially. They started appearing together more publicly, their social media filled with coupled photos and sweet captions that marked their relationship status clearly to all. It was a transition from a loose, undefined connection to something more solid and acknowledged, which took me by surprise, given the casual nature of their earlier interactions. Recently, wanting to clear the air and address any potential misunderstandings, I approached her during one of her visits to our home. I attempted an apology if my actions had seemed intrusive. Her response was forthright, suggesting I should have stayed out of my son's personal affairs, as the boundaries of their early relationship, though unclear to me, were set by them. This notion of variable boundaries in each situationship was a revelation to me and clearly a point of contention. My daughter, seeing the tension, suggested somewhat flippantly that I seek advice via Reddit, a reflection of her frustration with the situation. The girlfriend's reaction to our conversation was not hopeful. She became even colder, which worries me as my son is quite serious about their future together. The setting was our family living room, a space that usually felt cozy and inviting with its soft plush sofas and the gentle hum of the grandfather clock in the corner. However, on that particular afternoon, the atmosphere felt tense and uncomfortably charged. It was just the two of us, as I had asked her to stay back for a few minutes after a family lunch, hoping to discuss our misunderstandings privately. I chose my words carefully, trying to convey my sincerity and regret if my past actions had overstepped her boundaries. The autumn light filtered through the sheer curtains, casting soft patterns on the carpet, a stark contrast to the hardness of the conversation. As I spoke, I noticed her posture remained rigid, her hands tightly clasped in her lap. Her face, usually expressive and animated, was set in a mask of polite detachment. When she replied, her voice was cool and measured, her words carefully chosen to maintain a diplomatic but distant tone. She reminded me that the dynamics of her relationship with my son, even in its early stages, were for them to navigate and not for outsiders to interfere with. Her response left little room for the warmth or understanding I had hoped to foster. It was clear that my attempt at an apology hadn't thawed the frost between us. After a brief and somewhat stilted conversation, she excused herself, claiming a need to catch up on work. The way she quickly gathered her things and avoided eye contact as she left underscored the chilly atmosphere. Watching her leave, I felt a sinking feeling of unease. My son is deeply in love with her, often discussing their plans for the future with a bright enthusiasm. His seriousness about their relationship made her coldness towards me all the more troubling. It was clear that repairing this rift would require more than just a single conversation, and the path forward seemed daunting as I sat alone in the now silent room, pondering my next steps. Adding to the complexity, I've had limited interactions with her, but one significant episode did little to help our relationship. When she decided to drop out of college to pursue her career as an online influencer full-time, I expressed my concerns bluntly. She was close to completing her degree, and I saw her decision as potentially short-sighted. I voiced these thoughts more forcefully than I perhaps should have, given that I was not contributing financially to her education. Now reflecting on these events, I find myself questioning how best to mend this fractured relationship. My approach so far has evidently not been effective, and with my son's deepening commitment to her, the need to reconcile, for the sake of family harmony, feels urgent. I am contemplating ways to possibly bridge this gap, seeking to understand her perspective more fully and to communicate my intentions without overstepping boundaries. It's a delicate balance to strike, one that I hope, with time and effort, can be achieved. Are there any ways I can salvage the relationship? She didn't seem to appreciate our conversation and is getting even colder. My son, however, seems to be really determined to marry her. Update. I wasn't planning to share more at this point, preferring instead to keep things simple and civil. However, events took a turn that forced the issue out into the open. My daughter felt compelled to share our family troubles with my husband, perhaps hoping for a resolution that seemed beyond my reach. My husband, typically a steady presence though often absent due to his work which requires him to travel, is deeply invested in the well-being of our family. His career has enabled us to live more comfortably than many in our community, but it comes with the cost of his frequent absence. This time, he returned unexpectedly early and walked into the midst of unresolved tension. Unhappy with what he perceived as ongoing issues with our son, he made the drastic decision to ask him to leave our home, a course of action I hadn't anticipated and wasn't prepared for. I wasn't there when he arrived. I only came back to find that my son had already packed some essentials and left. The reality of seeing his space empty brought an ache, a deep unsettling feeling that things were spiraling out of my control. Meanwhile, my son's messages filled my phone, his words echoing his hurt and disbelief at being cast out, describing our actions as heartless. With my husband leaving town again the following day, the responsibility to manage the fallout and maintain our home fell heavily on my shoulders. He assured me that he would handle things concerning our son from afar, a statement that left me both relieved and distressed. How could we bridge such a significant rift with distance between us? My daughter, aligning with her father, showed little sympathy for her brother. Her reactions have been fierce, further straining the delicate threads holding us together. Whenever my son has attempted to return home to talk, their interactions have escalated quickly into shouting matches, leaving no room for the calm discussion we so desperately need. In the family home where warmth and laughter once permeated the air, a heavy tension had settled, thick and unyielding. My daughter had taken a firm stance alongside her father, reflecting his decision with unwavering support that bordered on harshness toward her brother. Her loyalty, while admirable in some contexts, added layers of complexity to our current familial strife. Now, every attempt at communication seemed to devolve into conflict. On one such occasion, my son, hopeful for reconciliation, knocked softly at the front door, his eyes searching for any sign of welcome. As I opened the door, the hopeful glimmer in his eyes faded almost instantly when he saw his sister standing behind me, her stance rigid, her expression stony. Before a word could be spoken, the air thickened with unspoken accusations and defenses. My son, usually reserved, began with a tentative, "Can we talk?" aiming to bridge the chasm that had formed between him and the family. However, his sister, interpreting his return as defiance, responded sharply, "Why are you here? You know Dad's decision." The conversation quickly escalated as voices rose. My daughter, mirroring her father's earlier decisiveness, accused her brother of being thoughtless and irresponsible. My son, frustrated and hurt, raised his voice in defense, pleading for understanding rather than judgment. The exchange grew louder, words flying like arrows, each one hitting far from the heart of the matter, his need for family support and our need to address issues as a family. As their mother, standing between them, I felt each word acutely, witnessing the thread of our family fabric stretching thin, threatening to snap. The living room, once a sanctuary of familial love, had transformed into a battleground of words and wills, leaving no room for the calm, constructive discussion that might heal our wounds. In these moments, the path to reconciliation seemed obscured by hurt feelings and hardened positions. The challenge lay in cooling the tempers and softening the hearts hardened by recent events. I knew that finding a way back to each other would require more than just time, It would need a willingness from all sides to listen, to understand, and to forgive. The conflict has left me feeling as though our family is being pulled apart at the seams. The very foundation of our unity seems shaken. I've always cherished the harmony within our household, never imagining a scenario where one of my children would be estranged like this. In my heart, I've never supported the idea of my son being kicked out of the house. I yearn for a way to mend what has been broken. In the meantime, I have set aside some money for my son. Just a small amount to help him get by until we can find a better solution. It's a practical measure, but it feels like a band-aid over a much larger wound. I appreciate the supportive comments many of you have shared. They've been a comfort in a situation where easy answers seem out of reach. I'm aware that my explanations might not capture all the nuances of our family dynamics or the complexity of the emotions involved. Still, I hold on to hope for a resolution that can bring us back together. I promise to provide an update when there's a positive development. Until then, thank you for your kindness and understanding. Edit. As weeks turned into months, the rift within our family began to show signs of mending, albeit slowly and with considerable effort from all sides. My son, undeterred by the challenges at home, continued his relationship with the influencer, his determination to marry her growing stronger despite the familial discord. Eventually, he proposed to her, and she accepted with a joy that was palpable even through the photographs he sent us. Seeing them together, genuinely happy and looking forward to building a future, sparked a change in my own heart and, slowly, in the dynamics of our family. I realized that regardless of past misunderstandings, my role as a mother was to support my son's choices and happiness. Acknowledging the need to bridge the gap, I invited my son and his fiancée to a family dinner. It was a tentative first step towards reconciliation. To my relief, my husband, having seen how deeply our son was committed, softened his stance and welcomed them warmly. The house, which had felt too large and silent, filled with life again as they walked through the door. The dinner was initially awkward, conversations tentative, but as the evening progressed, laughter began to replace the tension. My husband and I took genuine interest in their plans and aspirations, which included starting a business together that leveraged her online presence. Their enthusiasm was infectious, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a glimmer of the family unity we had lost. My daughter, however, remained the last holdout, her feelings still mixed and her skepticism apparent. Recognizing her feelings, the young couple approached her not with resentment, but with understanding. They shared their hopes for the family's unity and expressed a sincere desire for her to be part of their lives and future celebrations. They also took the time to engage in activities she enjoyed, showing up at her art exhibitions and supporting her projects. Gradually, my daughter began to respond to their efforts. It wasn't an overnight change, but each small interaction, each shared moment, seemed to soften her stance. The breakthrough came one evening, during a casual backyard barbecue, when she and her future sister-in-law teamed up for a game of charades. The laughter and camaraderie of that game seemed to wash away the last of her reservations. Months later, at the wedding, my daughter stood as the maid of honor, her speech touching and heartfelt, acknowledging her initial misgivings but also her joy at seeing her brother so happy and well-matched. The wedding itself was a beautiful affair, set in a lovely outdoor venue that reflected the couple's style and the healing that had taken place within our family. As I watched them exchange vows, surrounded by friends and family who had witnessed the struggles and now the joyful culmination, I felt a profound sense of peace. The journey had not been easy, but it had taught us all valuable lessons about love, forgiveness, and the enduring strength of family ties. The return of my son and his new wife to the family fold wasn't just a reunion, it was a new beginning, promising hope and happiness for the future. I quit my job to care for my father, but was shocked to discover his interactions with a prostitute broker and substantial withdrawals from his brokerage account. My name is Daniel. At 29, living in a bustling metropolitan area just an hour's drive from where I was raised, I find myself in a juxtaposition of worlds. My high-paced urban life as a successful software developer contrasts sharply with the quiet suburban life of my family. Earning $200,000 a year, I've established a comfortable existence in the city, complete with a sleek apartment overlooking the skyline, a wardrobe suited for tech company chic, and a social circle that revolves around tech meetups, weekend hiking trips, and the occasional high-end restaurant outing. Yet despite this seemingly ideal setup, my thoughts frequently drift back to the single-story house nestled in the serene suburbs, the place I still call home. The house, with its fading red brick facade and the large oak tree my father planted the year I was born, cradles more than just memories. It embodies the ongoing story of my family. My mother Jane, at 64, still powers through her work week, dedicating over 60 hours to her managerial role at a local logistics company. Despite the toll it takes, she brings home $95,000 annually, A sum that barely stretches to cover the essentials and the medical bills that have begun to pile up. Her resilience, often silent and unacknowledged, has been the cornerstone of our family's survival. Living with her are my father, Michael, and my older sister Sarah, along with her spirited 4.5-year-old son, Ethan. Dad, age 73, retired a few years back. His days of working as an electrician are behind him, replaced now by afternoons on the porch with a crossword puzzle, the remnants of a life spent in labor quietly fading into the routine of a man sustained by Social Security checks. His recent health scares, multiple heart surgeries aimed at preventing strokes, have marked him with a fragility that is both new and deeply disconcerting. Sarah, having never quite recovered from a tumultuous divorce, teaches at a local preschool. Earning just $60 an hour, she relies heavily on our parents for support. The echoes of her laughter, once the soundtrack of our childhood, now seem muffled by the weight of single motherhood and financial strain. Ethan's youthful energy brings a much-needed brightness to the house, his innocence a stark contrast to the complexities of the adult lives around him. Growing up, the warmth of family was the foundation of my world. My parents, though never well off, ensured that my sister and I lacked for nothing essential. They poured their energies into nurturing our interests, mine in computers and hers in art, fueling our dreams with the kind of unwavering support only parents can provide. This backdrop of familial love and sacrifice has shaped my understanding of responsibility and gratitude. Even as a teenager, I understood that the financial planning my parents had managed wouldn't suffice for their retirement. The inevitability of my role as their future financial backbone became apparent early on. It was a silent promise I made to myself, standing in our modest backyard, looking up at the stars, a promise to give back to the two people who had given me everything. My life now, filled with coding sprints and software launches, is worlds away from the simplicity of suburban rhythms. Yet the success I've found in the city isn't just mine, it belongs to my family too. Each achievement, each milestone reached, is a testament to the sacrifices made in that small house. This connection pulls me back, time and again, to where it all began. The phone calls began to increase about 6 months ago. Mom's voice, usually steady and calm, carried a tremor of worry as she updated me on Dad's health. The surgeries, the complications, and the haunting diagnosis of microvascular dementia and cerebrovascular disease that followed. Each call etched a deeper line of concern into my daily life, a stark reminder of the ephemeral nature of time and health. It was during one such call, as I gazed out over the city lights from my apartment, that the decision was made. The pull of my family's needs outweighed the allure of city lights and fleeting tech trends. I knew then with a certainty that rooted itself deep within me. I needed to return home, to be there in ways that phone calls and weekend visits simply couldn't cover. So, I started to plan. Plan for a future that involved more than just my personal aspirations, plans that would weave the safety and well-being of my family into the fabric of my daily existence. This wasn't just a decision born out of duty but out of a deep-seated love and a commitment to those who had shaped me. This return home isn't merely a change of address, it's a reorientation of my life's priorities. As I pack up my city life, each item I place into a box, a book, a photo, a souvenir from a tech conference, is a tangible reminder of the journey I've undertaken. Ahead lies a path filled with challenges and adjustments, but also with the opportunity to give back in the most meaningful way possible. As I maneuvered my sedan into the familiar driveway of my childhood home, the crunch of gravel under tires felt like a metaphor for the uneasy reintroduction to a life I once knew. Stepping out, I was greeted by the sight of my mother, Jane, at the front door. Her smile was warm but worn, the kind that spoke of countless worries weathered over years. She wrapped me in an embrace that felt both comforting and desperate, her way of saying she needed help without uttering a word. Inside, the atmosphere of the house was thick with the scent of nostalgia mixed with tension. My sister Sarah stood in the kitchen, a half-smile playing on her lips as she juggled making dinner and entertaining Ethan, who buzzed around with the boundless energy of childhood. Our greetings were brief, a stilted exchange that belied the deeper currents of concern we all felt but didn't voice. Sarah was visibly thinner than I remembered, her face drawn not just from the fatigue of single motherhood, but from the constant strain of living in a house clouded with uncertainty. The first few days were an adjustment, a recalibration of roles within our family dynamics. My mother continued to work, her hours unyielding despite the added emotional load. At night, we sat at the dinner table, conversations skirting around the unspoken, Dad's condition, the financial strain, the future. It was during these meals that I truly understood the full extent of what had been kept from me in our phone calls. The weight of Dad's medical expenses, the fear of what was to come, and the everyday challenges of caring for someone who was slowly forgetting the life he had led. Dad's interactions with us had changed profoundly. Once a lively storyteller, his conversations now lost their thread, his frustrations palpable as he grappled with the gaps in his memory. Observing him, I saw flashes of the man who taught me to ride a bike, who fixed broken appliances with a magician's ease, now struggling to remember names, faces, and dates. The impact on Mom was heartbreaking. She oscillated between being a caring spouse and a weary nurse, her face etching deeper with lines of sorrow each day. Sarah's reaction to my return was mixed. Initially, there was relief, an extra pair of hands to help, a reprieve from her role as the primary support. But as days passed, old grievances surfaced. We clashed, not just over small mundane things like household chores or schedules, but about deeper issues. Resentments about past decisions, particularly my choice to move away and pursue my career, came to light. "You left just when things were getting tough," she accused one evening, her words slicing through the fragile peace. "And now you just waltz back in expecting to fix everything?" These confrontations were painful but necessary. They opened up dialogues long overdue, about our roles in this family, about support and sacrifice. It was through these difficult conversations that we began to navigate our new reality. Slowly, we started to forge a path forward, not just as individuals living under one roof, but as a cohesive unit facing a crisis together. Through it all, my bond with Ethan became a source of joy and escape. His innocence and unbridled enthusiasm for life reminded us all of the simpler joys. In his world, the problems were as solvable as figuring out the right block to fit into a puzzle. He became my little shadow, following me around, asking questions, his laughter a balm on the rough days. As weeks turned into months, my role in the family began to solidify. I found myself balancing my work remotely with attending doctor's appointments with Dad, discussing financial strategies with Mom, and providing moral support to Sarah. The shift was palpable. Where once I was just a visitor in their lives, I now became an integral part of the household's daily rhythm. One evening, as Mom and I sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, she turned to me, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I'm so glad you're here," she whispered. "It's been hard. Harder than I ever let on. But having you here makes it feel like we can manage this, like we're not alone in it." Her words struck a chord. I realized then that my return was not just about providing financial or physical support. It was about healing, about mending the frayed threads of our family fabric. It was about showing up, not just in times of crisis but every day, proving through actions that family, with all its imperfections and challenges, is worth every sacrifice. The transition back home wasn't smooth. It was fraught with adjustments, misunderstandings, and at times heartache. But it was also filled with moments of profound connection, understanding, and gradual healing. In this house, with these people, I rediscovered the essence of home. It wasn't just a place, but a feeling of belonging, of being needed, and most importantly, of loving and being loved, unconditionally. The stability we once took for granted began to shake when my father's health declined. The man who taught me how to throw a baseball, who could fix just about anything broken, found himself battling a series of health issues that seemed to come one after the other. It started with heart problems that required immediate and intensive medical intervention. The terms TAVR, transcatheter aortic valve replacement, and TCAR, transcarotid artery revascularization, became unexpectedly familiar as we navigated through the complexities of cardiac surgeries designed to prevent strokes. Despite the doctor's efforts, a stroke slipped through the cracks of medical prevention, leaving him with small vessel disease and vascular dementia. His cognitive functions began to deteriorate, a stark contrast to the sharp wit and immense knowledge he once wielded effortlessly. Making the decision to move back home wasn't easy. It required me to uproot the life I had built in the city, the late-night coding sessions, the weekend hikes, the network of ambitious, tech-savvy friends. I had to step away from a promotion that was almost in reach, trading potential career advancements for family responsibilities. It was a trade I made willingly, driven by an innate sense of duty that my parents had instilled in me from a young age. Moving back to the suburban home where I grew up meant reacquainting myself with its rhythms and routines. My old room, once a shrine to teenage ambitions and dreams, now seemed smaller, the walls echoing the past. Adjusting to this life meant quieter evenings, the absence of city noise replaced by the subtle sounds of a house that breathed with the lives of its inhabitants. It meant seeing my father's empty chair at the dinner table when he had particularly bad days, and it meant stepping into the role of caretaker, a role I had never envisioned in my youthful imaginings. To aid in my father's care, I introduced technology that I hoped would bridge the gap between his needs and my ability to meet them. The AirPods Pro I bought him connected him to his favorite music and shows, providing comfort when the confusion of dementia clouded his mind. More significantly, I gifted him my Apple Watch Series 8, equipped with health monitoring features. This watch became a crucial tool in tracking his heart's behavior, particularly its ability to detect atrial fibrillation, a condition we now watched meticulously. The transition was emotionally taxing. The joy of being close to my family again was often overshadowed by the realities of my father's condition. Each doctor's visit, each small sign of his worsening health, reminded me of why I had returned. I spent countless hours researching ways to enhance his quality of life, from diet changes to cognitive exercises that might slow the progression of his dementia. That night was unusually quiet, the sort of silence that seems almost anticipatory, as if the house itself was holding its breath. After dinner, where conversation fluttered nervously around mundane topics, I found myself restless. With a mind that refused to quiet, I decided to tinker with some of the tech gadgets I'd brought for Dad, thinking perhaps I could distract myself. Dad had always been somewhat wary of technology, but he had taken a peculiar interest in the Apple Watch I gave him, fascinated by its ability to monitor his heart rate and other health metrics. It had become a routine for me to help him set it up, ensure it was charged, and sometimes, reset it to make sure it was functioning optimally. That night, as I took the watch into my hands, I noticed it needed resetting. The screen was lit up with notifications, too many for Dad to have possibly managed on his own. As I navigated through the menus to find the settings, a message notification popped up briefly before disappearing. My curiosity piqued, I ventured into the Messages app. It was then I noticed the recently deleted folder had entries, something I hadn't expected Dad to know how to use. The logical part of my mind suggested there was a simple explanation. Perhaps Mom had deleted messages after borrowing his watch. But something about the late hour, the quiet of the house, and the nagging sense of unease that had settled in my stomach compelled me to open the folder. The messages I found there were not just surprising. They were shocking. The texts were not from family members or old friends, but from an unknown number, discussing arrangements and meetings with an unsettling familiarity and explicitness. Each message was more revealing than the last, discussing times, locations, and payments. The content was clear. My father had been communicating with a prostitute broker. I felt a cold wave of disbelief wash over me, followed by a sharp pang of betrayal. My father, the man who had taught me the values of honesty and integrity, was leading a secret life that was now laid bare before me. I sat there, the watch heavy in my hands, as I struggled to reconcile this image with the father I thought I knew. Driven by a need to understand the full extent of this betrayal, I logged into his brokerage account, which he had shared access with me years ago for emergencies. What I found only deepened the chasm that was opening up inside me. The account, which should have held close to $100,000, was now down to $66,000. The transaction history showed several withdrawals of $3,000 each over the past year, coinciding with the dates mentioned in the deleted texts. The room felt like it was spinning as I pieced together the implications of these withdrawals. This wasn't just a moral transgression, it was a financial betrayal that affected our entire family. The money in that account was supposed to be part of my parents' retirement fund, crucial for their care, especially given Dad's health condition. Yet it had been siphoned away to fund clandestine meetings that shattered the facade of the life we had been living. I sat alone with this information well into the night, the glow from the screen of my laptop casting shadows on the walls. The weight of what I had discovered felt overwhelming, not just in its immediate impact, but in what it meant for the future. How could I confront my father about this? What would this revelation do to my mother, who had already borne so much? And what of Sarah and Ethan, who lived under this roof, innocent and unaware of the storm that was brewing? The night's revelations hung heavily in the air, tainting the familiar comfort of my old bedroom. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, grappling with a whirlwind of emotions. From anger and betrayal to an overwhelming sense of desolation. Growing up, my father was my hero. He was the one who taught me to ride a bike, to respect others, and to stand up for what I believe in. But as I grew older, I witnessed the facade crumble. Behind closed doors, his relationship with my mother was fraught with tension and discord. He spent money with little regard for our family's financial stability, indulging in whims as if the act could fill the growing voids within our household. My mother, in stark contrast, was the pillar who bore the financial burdens, working tirelessly, yet never allowed herself the luxury of even the smallest indulgences. In my early 20s, the strain had become unbearable. I had issued an ultimatum to them: resolve their issues or face losing me. At the time, it seemed like a necessary threat. Looking back, it only served to deepen the divide, especially with my mother, who felt caught in an impossible situation. She resented the position I put her in, yet continued to patch the seams of our family fabric in silence. The night before, as I delved deeper into my father's deceit, the years of pent-up frustration and disappointment erupted. The discovery of his communications with a prostitute broker, along with the significant withdrawals from his brokerage account, was the last straw. This wasn't just a moral failing, It was a betrayal that jeopardized our family's financial security. Sitting at the kitchen table that morning, surrounded by the remnants of my childhood and the shattered pieces of the respect I once had for my father, I felt a profound sense of alienation. I couldn't face my family. I couldn't look into my mother's eyes, knowing the additional pain this would cause her. So, I made a decision. One that now, in the quiet solitude of my city apartment, I question with every aching part of my being. I left. Without a word of explanation, I packed a bag, the weight of each item seeming to anchor me further into a quagmire of guilt and confusion. I left a note, vague and insufficient, expressing a need for some time alone to think. As I drove back to the metropolitan bustle from which I had come, each mile widened the chasm between my family and me, both physically and emotionally. Now, sitting in the dim light of my apartment, the city sounds a dull roar in the background. I am plagued by uncertainty and remorse. The silence of the space amplifies the chaos of my thoughts. I ponder the irony of how I, who had returned home to mend and care, had fled when the reality of my family's imperfections became too stark to bear. I'm struggling with the dichotomy of my emotions. On one hand, my father's actions are indefensible, a reckless endangerment of our family's stability and my mother's sacrifices. On the other, he is still my father, the man who, despite his flaws, played a crucial role in who I am today. How do I reconcile these two sides? How do I balance the scales of justice and filial duty? I remember my mother's words from years ago, after I had issued my ultimatum. She had said, "We all have our demons and disappointments, but we don't have to carry them alone." Her words echo in my mind now, a reminder that perhaps abandonment isn't the solution, but a continuation of a cycle of hurt. I find myself typing out my thoughts, casting them into the void of the internet. Perhaps someone out there has faced similar crossroads, has navigated the murky waters of familial obligation and personal integrity. I seek not absolution, but perspective. How do others deal with the complexities of family dynamics, where love and disappointment are so often intertwined? As I sit here, the cursor blinking expectantly, I realize that my journey back home isn't just about geographical distance. It's about bridging the gap between the son I was and the man I need to become. It's about facing the hard truths, not just about my father, but about myself and my own reactions. It's about understanding that in the tapestry of family, each thread, however flawed, contributes to the strength and pattern of the whole. Tomorrow, I will call my mother. I will not offer excuses for my abrupt departure, but I will listen. I will try to understand her side of this lifelong partnership that has borne so much strain. And perhaps through these conversations, we can begin to forge a new path forward, not just for her and me, but for our entire family. For now, I sit alone with my thoughts, the city outside unaware of the turmoil within. But I am resolved not to let this night pass without reaching out, without trying to mend what has been broken. For in the end, family is not just about the good times shared, but also about navigating the storms together, and emerging, perhaps a little battered, but whole. I find myself in a situation where I desperately need some guidance, and I hope you can offer me your opinions and possible solutions. After uncovering some troubling secrets about my father's actions, which have jeopardized our family's financial stability and emotional well-being, I'm torn about how to best handle the situation. I left home abruptly, driven by a mix of anger, disappointment, and confusion. And now, sitting alone in my apartment, I'm struggling to find the right course of action. This discovery has not only caused a rift in my family but has also left me questioning my own decisions, especially my immediate reaction to flee. The dynamics in my family have always been complicated, shaped by long-standing financial strains and personal grievances, and this latest revelation feels like a breaking point. I am reaching out to you, the community, in hopes of gaining some perspective on how others might navigate such a family crisis. How do you balance personal integrity with familial responsibilities, especially when faced with deep-seated issues like betrayal? How can I approach this situation in a way that might help mend the relationships rather than cause further damage? Your insights and advice would be invaluable to me during this difficult time, and I truly appreciate any thoughts you share. Thank you for taking the time to listen about my situation, and for any guidance you can provide. My husband and I had a threesome with his friend, and now he and his friend think I should continue having relations with the friend. I'm 29 years old, and my husband Jake is 34. We've always prided ourselves on having an adventurous sex life. From the beginning of our relationship, we've been open to exploring different facets of our sexuality, always prioritizing communication and mutual consent. Our trust and openness have been the cornerstones of our relationship, allowing us to venture into areas that many couples might find intimidating. One of the ways we've spiced things up over the years is by inviting others into our bedroom. Threesomes have been an occasional but thrilling part of our sexual repertoire. Until recently, These encounters have always involved female partners. We found these experiences to be exhilarating and bonding. Each one brought us closer, reinforcing our trust and connection. Our last threesome, however, was different. It involved Jake's friend, Mark, who is 32. This was our first time bringing a male partner into the mix, and it added a new dynamic to our usual adventures. I won't lie, the experience was electrifying. The chemistry between Mark and me was palpable, and it was clear from the start that we were very into each other. The night began with drinks and laughter. The atmosphere was relaxed and comfortable, thanks to the familiarity we all shared. Jake and Mark had been friends for years, and I'd gotten to know Mark well through various social gatherings. There was a natural ease between us, which made the transition to more intimate activities smooth and unforced. As the night progressed, we moved from the living room to the bedroom. The initial nervousness I felt dissipated quickly as we started to engage. There was an intensity between Mark and me that I hadn't anticipated. He was attentive, his touch igniting sensations that were both new and exciting. Jake seemed to be enjoying himself too, watching us and joining in at intervals. The whole experience felt surreal, almost like we were crossing into uncharted territory together. The threesome itself was incredible. I experienced a level of pleasure that took me by surprise. Mark said and did things that were different from what Jake would typically do. It was like he instinctively knew how to push my buttons in ways that left me breathless. I reached climax 3 times that night, each one more intense than the last. I found myself getting lost in the moment, savoring every touch and sensation. In the days following, I couldn't shake the memories of that night. Despite the incredible physical experience, I didn't think much of it beyond being a great adventure. I believed that it was a one-time event, something to be enjoyed and then left in the past. Jake and I didn't talk about it much, which I took as a sign that we were both content to let it be what it was, a thrilling but isolated experience. However, things took an unexpected turn about a week later when Mark came over for drinks. We were all sitting in the living room, reminiscing about old times, when Jake suddenly suggested, "You two should have made love without me." I nearly choked on my drink. I laughed it off at first, thinking he must be joking, but the serious look on his face told me otherwise. I told him I wasn't interested in doing that, hoping to shut down the conversation quickly. Jake dropped the subject, but only until Mark left. Once we were alone, he brought it up again. He insisted that he had seen a connection between Mark and me that he felt we should explore. He even suggested that if I had found something good with Mark, I shouldn't give it up. His persistence baffled me. I reiterated that I wasn't going to sleep with Mark again. Jake seemed convinced that I would change my mind eventually and told me that he was okay with it as long as I was honest with him about it. His insistence left me feeling confused and uneasy. That night marked the beginning of a period of inner turmoil and reflection for me. I was caught between the memories of the incredible night with Mark and my commitment to Jake. The experience had been enjoyable, but it wasn't something I wanted to pursue outside the context of our mutual exploration. I couldn't understand why Jake was pushing for it, and his pressure made me question the dynamics of our relationship in ways I hadn't before. In the days that followed, Mark began texting me, expressing his interest in continuing our connection. Despite the temptation, I knew deep down that pursuing anything further with him would be a mistake. I declined his offers, but his persistence and Jake's unusual encouragement left me feeling conflicted and uncertain about the future. The evening when Jake suggested that Mark and I should make love without him started off like any other casual gathering. It was a Friday night, and the three of us were lounging in the living room, sipping on drinks and reminiscing about old times. The atmosphere was relaxed, and laughter flowed freely as we recounted amusing stories from our past. Mark had come over for drinks, and there was a comfortable familiarity in the air. The memory of our recent threesome lingered, but I hadn't given it much thought beyond the initial thrill. It was an adventure, something Jake and I had done together, and I assumed it was now a part of our past experiences. We were halfway through our second round of drinks when Jake, out of nowhere, suggested, "You two should have sex without me." The words hung in the air, startlingly clear despite the casual tone in which he spoke them. I nearly choked on my drink, my eyes widening in shock. I glanced at Mark, who seemed equally taken aback, and then back at Jake, hoping to see some sign that he was joking. But Jake's expression was completely serious. He met my gaze with a steady look, as if he was suggesting something as mundane as ordering takeout for dinner. "I'm serious," he said, his voice calm and measured. "You two had such a great connection during the threesome. I think you should explore that." My mind raced, trying to process what he had just said. This was not something we had ever discussed or even hinted at. Our threesomes had always been about mutual enjoyment and exploration, with clear boundaries and communication. The idea of me being with Mark without Jake's presence was completely outside the realm of what I had ever considered. "I don't think that's a good idea," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady despite the shock. I forced a laugh, hoping to lighten the mood and steer the conversation away from this unexpected and uncomfortable topic. I mean, it was a one-time thing. I'm not interested in pursuing anything further. Jake didn't seem deterred by my refusal. If anything, he leaned forward, his eyes intent and unwavering. I saw the way you two connected, he said. It was different from anything I've seen between us. If you found something special, why not explore it? I could feel a knot forming in my stomach. Jake, I'm not going to sleep with Mark again, I said firmly. It was an amazing experience, but that's where it ends. I'm married to you, and I'm not interested in complicating things further. Mark, who had been silent up until now, finally spoke up. Jake, are you sure about this? He asked, a hint of disbelief in his voice. I mean, it was fun, but I don't want to cause any issues between you two. Jake turned to Mark and nodded. I appreciate that, but I think it could be good for all of us. I trust both of you, and I think this could bring something positive. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My mind was a whirl of emotions, confusion, anger, and a creeping sense of betrayal. This was supposed to be a partnership, and Jake's insistence felt like a violation of the trust we had built. I needed to make it clear that this was not something I wanted. Jake, this isn't happening, I said, my voice firm and resolute. I love you, and I'm committed to you. I'm not interested in pursuing anything with Mark outside of what we did together. Please, just drop it. Jake sighed, leaning back in his chair. For a moment, I thought he might finally let it go, but then he spoke again, his tone softer but still insistent. I just want you to be happy, he said. And if being with Mark makes you happy, I'm okay with it. Just promise me you'll think about it. I stared at him, unable to comprehend why he was pushing this so hard. Jake, you're not listening to me, I said, frustration creeping into my voice. I don't want this. I'm happy with you. Can't we just move on and forget about it? Mark, sensing the tension, stood up. Maybe I should go, he said awkwardly. I don't want to be the cause of any trouble. Jake nodded, but as Mark left, he turned to me again. We'll talk about this later, he said, almost as if it were a given that I would eventually see things his way. The door closed behind Mark, and the silence in the room was deafening. I looked at Jake, searching his face for any sign of understanding or regret, but all I saw was determination. It was as if he had made up his mind and was simply waiting for me to come around. That night, I lay awake in bed, my mind racing. I couldn't understand why Jake was so insistent on this. Did he really believe that I would be happier with Mark? Or was there something else driving his persistence? The thought that he might be trying to push me away or test my loyalty gnawed at me. In the days that followed, Jake continued to bring up the idea in subtle ways, each time met with my firm refusal. His persistence only deepened my confusion and unease. The relationship dynamics had shifted, and I wasn't sure how to navigate this new terrain. All I knew was that I had to stand my ground and make it clear that my loyalty and love were with Jake, and I wasn't going to let anything or anyone come between us. The days following Jake's shocking proposal were tense. I couldn't shake the feeling of discomfort and confusion that his suggestion had left me with. Mark's visit a week after the threesome only added to the complexity of the situation. When Mark came over, the atmosphere was charged with an awkwardness that hadn't been there before. We sat in the living room, trying to maintain the usual camaraderie, but there was an unspoken tension hanging in the air. Jake seemed oblivious, or perhaps he was pretending to be, as he laughed and joked as if nothing had changed. I, on the other hand, was hyper-aware of every glance and movement. As the evening wore on, I excused myself to the kitchen to get some space and gather my thoughts. While I was there, Mark followed me, his expression serious. Hey, about what Jake said the other night, he began, lowering his voice. Are you really okay with that? I shook my head. No, Mark, I'm not. I don't know why Jake is pushing this, but I told him I'm not interested in pursuing anything further. I'm committed to my marriage. Mark nodded, but there was a hint of something in his eyes. Disappointment, perhaps. I get it, he said. I just wanted to make sure we were on the same page. We returned to the living room, but the rest of the evening passed in a blur. When Mark finally left, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. I hoped that was the end of it, but it wasn't long before the text messages started. The first message came the next morning. Hey, I had a great time last night, just wanted to check in and see how you're doing. It seemed innocent enough, but I couldn't help but read into it, given the recent context. I replied politely, keeping the conversation light and casual. But as the days went on, Mark's messages became more frequent and more direct. I can't stop thinking about our time together. One message read. You were incredible. Would you ever consider seeing me alone? My heart raced as I read his words. The memory of our threesome lingered in my mind, and I couldn't deny that I had felt a strong connection with Mark. But this was different. This was stepping into territory that felt dangerous and wrong. I was married to Jake, and despite his strange encouragement, I knew in my heart that I didn't want to pursue anything with Mark outside of our mutual experiences. "Mark, I told you. I'm not interested in pursuing anything further," I texted back, trying to be firm but not hurtful. "I'm committed to my husband." His response was quick. "I understand, but I can't help how I feel. If you ever change your mind, just know that I'm here." The persistence in his messages unsettled me. Each time my phone buzzed with a new text, a mix of anxiety and temptation coursed through me. Mark was attractive, and the sex had been incredible, but I knew that acting on those feelings would only lead to complications and heartache. As the days turned into weeks, Mark continued to text me, often late at night. His messages became more insistent, pushing the boundaries of our conversations. "You have no idea how much I want you," he wrote one night. "I can't stop thinking about what we could have together." I felt trapped between my growing discomfort and the remnants of the attraction I had felt during our encounter. Each message chipped away at my resolve, but I knew I had to stay strong. I began to distance myself, responding less frequently and keeping my replies short and to the point. One night, after another particularly persistent message from Mark, I decided I needed to take a firmer stand. "Mark, I need you to stop texting me like this," I wrote. "I've made it clear that I'm not interested. Please respect my boundaries." There was a long pause before his response came through. "I'm sorry if I've made you uncomfortable," he texted back. "I'll back off. But if you ever change your mind, you know where to find me." Yet the temptation was undeniable. Mark continued to text me, his messages filled with playful banter and subtle hints at wanting more. Each notification brought a mix of excitement and dread. I enjoyed our conversations, the way he made me feel desired and special, but I also knew that engaging with him was a slippery slope. Every time I replied, I felt like I was inching closer to a line I couldn't uncross. In my quieter moments I found myself questioning everything. I wondered why Jake was so insistent on this arrangement. Did he truly believe it would make me happy? Or was there something else at play? The idea that he might be testing my loyalty or pushing me away gnawed at me. Our marriage had always been built on trust and mutual respect, but this situation was unraveling those foundations. There were moments of introspection where I tried to dissect my own feelings. One evening, as I sat alone in the living room, I let my thoughts drift back to the threesome. I recalled the way Mark looked at me, the intensity in his eyes. It wasn't just about the physical pleasure. There had been a connection, a spark that was hard to ignore. I tried to understand why that connection had such a strong pull on me. Was it because it was new and exciting? Or was there something lacking in my relationship with Jake that I had been too afraid to acknowledge? These thoughts weighed heavily on me, affecting my daily life. I found it hard to concentrate at work, my mind constantly wandering back to the what-ifs and maybes. At home, the tension between Jake and me was palpable. We tried to go about our routines as usual, but there was an undercurrent of unresolved issues that neither of us seemed ready to address head-on. One afternoon, while I was doing laundry, I had a flashback to the night of the threesome. I remembered the way Mark had kissed me, his lips soft but insistent. I could still feel the warmth of his body against mine, the way he made me feel completely desired. The memory was so vivid that it left me breathless. I sank to the floor, overwhelmed by the intensity of my emotions. How could something that felt so good be so wrong? As the days turned into weeks, the emotional turmoil only deepened. Jake's persistence didn't wane, and every time he brought up the topic, it felt like a fresh wound. I tried to talk to him about my feelings, hoping to make him understand the depth of my conflict. "Jake, I love you," I said one evening, my voice trembling. "I don't want to be with anyone else. I'm committed to you. Why can't you see that?" He looked at me with a mixture of sadness and determination. "I know you love me, and I love you too. But I saw something between you and Mark that I can't ignore. I don't want to hold you back from something that could make you happy." His words stung, but they also added to my confusion. How could he be so willing to share me with someone else? It felt like he was pushing me away, and the thought of losing him was unbearable. The fear of what this could do to our marriage was ever present, casting a shadow over every interaction we had. In the midst of this turmoil, I sought solace in small moments of clarity. There were times when I would sit in our backyard, the cool evening breeze soothing my troubled mind. I would close my eyes and try to center myself, focusing on my love for Jake and the life we had built together. These moments of introspection were fleeting, but they reminded me of what was truly important. Despite the temptation and the confusion, my loyalty to Jake remained steadfast. I knew that pursuing anything with Mark would only complicate things further and potentially destroy the trust that Jake and I had worked so hard to build. But the path forward was unclear, and the emotional roller coaster I was on showed no signs of stopping. One particularly difficult night, I found myself lying awake, staring at the ceiling. My mind was a mess of thoughts and feelings, each one more confusing than the last. I turned to Jake, who was sleeping peacefully beside me, and felt a surge of love and protectiveness. This was the man I had chosen to spend my life with. The man who had stood by me through thick and thin. I couldn't let anything come between us. As I drifted off to sleep, I resolved to find a way to navigate this complicated situation without compromising my values or my marriage. It wouldn't be easy, and there would undoubtedly be more difficult conversations ahead. But I was determined to hold on to the love and loyalty that had brought Jake and me together in the first place. No matter how strong the temptation or how confusing the emotions, my commitment to my husband would remain unwavering. One evening, after dinner, I suggested we sit down and talk. Jake could sense the seriousness in my voice, and he nodded, following me to the living room. We sat on the couch, the tension between us palpable. I took a deep breath, gathering my thoughts and summoning the courage to address the issue head on. Jake, we need to talk about what happened with Mark, I began, my voice steady but filled with emotion. I can't keep going like this. Feeling torn and confused. We need to figure out where we stand and what we want for our future. Jake looked at me, his eyes softening. He took a deep breath and nodded. You're right. We do need to talk. I've been thinking about it a lot too. I hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to proceed, but then the words started to flow. When you suggested that I sleep with Mark without you, it really threw me off. It felt like you were pushing me away, and I didn't understand why. I need to know where this is coming from and what you really want. Jake sighed and ran a hand through his hair. I'm sorry for putting you in this position. I thought that by encouraging you to explore things with Mark, I was being open and supportive. But I realize now that it wasn't fair to you. He paused, looking down at his hands. The truth is, I've been feeling really insecure. Seeing you connect with Mark in a way that we haven't connected in a while. It made me feel like I wasn't enough for you. His admission caught me off guard. I had suspected that there might be underlying issues, but hearing him voice his insecurities made my heart ache. Jake, you are enough for me, I said softly, reaching out to take his hand. I love you, and I don't want anyone else. The threesome with Mark was a one-time thing, and I don't want it to go any further. I'm committed to you. Jake squeezed my hand, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. I know you love me, and I love you too. But seeing you with Mark brought up all these feelings of inadequacy. I thought that maybe if I encouraged it, I could somehow be a part of it and not feel so left out. But it backfired. I didn't enjoy seeing how much you enjoyed being with him, and it's been eating me up inside. Tears welled up in my eyes as I listened to his words. Jake, you should have told me how you were feeling. We need to be honest with each other about our insecurities and fears. Pushing me towards Mark only made things more complicated and painful for both of us. He nodded, his expression filled with regret. I know. I should have talked to you about it. I'm sorry for putting you through this. I see now that it was a mistake. We sat in silence for a few moments, both of us processing the weight of the conversation. Finally, I spoke up. I think the best thing we can do right now is to cut contact with Mark. It's clear that his involvement has caused more harm than good, and we need to focus on us. Jake agreed. You're right. We need to distance ourselves from Mark and work on our relationship. I want to rebuild the trust and connection we have. I want us to be strong again. I nodded, feeling a sense of relief and clarity. Me too. Let's commit to each other and make our relationship a priority. We can get through this together. Over the next few days, we took concrete steps to distance ourselves from Mark. Jake sent him a message explaining that we needed to cut ties for the sake of our marriage. Mark was understanding, though disappointed, and agreed to respect our decision. It was a difficult but necessary step, and it felt like a weight had been lifted off our shoulders. With Mark out of the picture, Jake and I focused on rebuilding our relationship. We scheduled regular date nights, took long walks together, and made a conscious effort to communicate more openly about our feelings and needs. I smiled, squeezing his hand. We are, Jake. We've faced some tough challenges, but we're coming out stronger on the other side. I love you, and I'm committed to us. As the days turned into weeks, our relationship continued to improve. We rekindled the passion and intimacy that had brought us together in the first place. Our sex life flourished as we focused on each other, exploring new ways to connect and satisfy each other. The threesome with Mark became a distant memory, a lesson learned about the importance of boundaries and communication. There were still moments of doubt and insecurity, but we faced them together, supporting each other through the ups and downs. Our commitment to each other never wavered, and we grew more confident in our ability to navigate whatever challenges came our way. Reflecting on our journey, I realized that the experience had brought us closer in unexpected ways. It forced us to confront our insecurities and communicate more openly. It reminded us of the importance of prioritizing our relationship and being honest about our needs and fears. Through it all, our love for each other remained the foundation that kept us strong. As we sat on the porch, watching the stars appear in the night sky, I felt a deep sense of peace and gratitude. We had faced a difficult trial, but we had emerged stronger and more connected. I knew that no matter what the future held, we would face it together, with love, trust, and unwavering commitment. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you. My husband loves me and treats me very well, but he has never made me feel sexually desired. What should I do? Stay or leave? Our story began nearly 2 years ago. We have been married nearly 1 year and dated for 1 year prior to that. Although it sometimes feels both shorter and longer because of how strangely emotions can affect our sense of time. We met through friends when neither of us was looking for love. He was a devout Catholic, while I didn't follow any religion. Our backgrounds were quite different, but I was drawn to his kindness and strong moral values, which stood out even though we came from different places. From the outset, he was candid about his past and his intentions. He was saving himself mostly for marriage, just 2 times had sex with, which is a one-night stand, and once a short-term girlfriend. The way he spoke was pleasant, and I responded by being direct about my misgivings. As we were both in our early 30s, I thought it could be tough to interact with someone so inexperienced and constrained by religious views on sexuality. I told him straight out that I don't trust religious people who have never had sex. Despite these differences, or perhaps because of them, we found ourselves drawn into a deeper relationship. Before long, we faced the physical dimension of our growing attachment. He agreed to engage sexually before marriage, understanding my need to ensure that we had both physical and emotional chemistry. However, when we finally became intimate, the experience was underwhelming. It felt mechanical, devoid of the passion I had hoped would ignite between us. I addressed this lack of chemistry frankly, expressing my fear that his desire might not solely be curbed by religious beliefs, but perhaps also questioning his true sexual orientation, or deeper preferences. I didn't care about how inexperienced he was. I even told him I don't need good sex, but I just wanted to make sure he had sexual desires for me, as I wanted to make sure he also wasn't a homosexual in denial. Distraught, I decided to step back, unsure if we could find mutual satisfaction and fearing a future mired in unmet desires. We ended up back together after 1 day. He told me to have faith in us and let time heal us. His voice filled with a mix of hurt and hope, urging me to have faith in what could develop between us over time. His plea, sincere and heartfelt, prompted me to reconsider, and so we resumed our relationship, stepping into a marriage that promised to grow from zero. Nearly 2 years later, the initial concerns I harbored about our sexual compatibility seemed to solidify into tangible issues. Our encounters were infrequent, roughly once every few weeks, and still lacked the spontaneity and passion I craved. Each experience felt scripted and strained, as if he were performing a duty rather than engaging in an act of love. With the exception of one time. He was affectionate in other ways as well, such as with massages, tender touches, and thoughtful gestures, but these never developed into closer relationships. I have no doubt that he loves me, and his tenderness comes through in everything he does. But there's still a chasm between us, full of unspoken words and unmet expectations. Moreover, it was harder for me to keep my wounds and fears contained when he admitted that he had just once recently engaged in masturbation with his ex-girlfriend. That in itself is not only the simple act of possessing sexual desire but also implies that his soul and interest are not directed towards me. This thought tore at my self-worth and made me feel even more depressed, making me wonder how long our love would last. Every conversation regarding our intimacy, or lack thereof, appeared to center on his argument that he acted that way because my first rejection had wounded him and made him cautious. This painful revelation cut deeply into my self-esteem, feeling like a ragged tear in the fabric of my self-worth. It painted my days with heavier shades of blues, casting a melancholic hue on my everyday life. It made me question the durability of our love and the stability of our relationship, pushing me to ask myself, just how much longer will our love sustain? It seems like he is using your initial rejection as a defense mechanism to justify his lack of intimacy. This could be because he, consciously or subconsciously, fears suffering that same rejection again. As such, he might be pulling away and avoiding being vulnerable in order to protect himself from potential emotional pain. Blaming me also conveniently removes his own responsibility for the current state of my relationship. However, it's important to understand that this is only one interpretation, and the true reasoning can only be confirmed by him. But how long could one hold on to such an injury? It had been nearly 2 years, surely time enough for healing, particularly with someone committed to standing by your side. Yet here we were, stagnant, with me feeling increasingly rejected in sex and him cloaked in his enduring hurt. This persistent state of unfulfillment has left me feeling betrayed, not by infidelity or deceit but by unmet expectations and unresolved issues that eat away at the fabric of our marriage. I find myself at a crossroads, contemplating a future where my desires might forever remain just out of reach, trapped within the confines of a relationship that fulfills the heart in some ways but starves it in others. I can't help but question how we can go on for the rest of our lives like this. I feel so betrayed. Has anyone been through something similar, and if so, how did you manage? I wondered if they managed to rekindle their old passions or if they also settled for a relationship filled with emotional comfort but lacking physical chemistry, like us. How could we go on for years like this? This question overshadowed our shared moments of joy and love for each other. Update. After reading all comments below my post, I realized that effective communication is critical in resolving these types of issues. Perhaps I should consider having a candid conversation with him about my feelings and concerns. It may also be beneficial for me to seek professional advice or counseling to help navigate this situation. Some of them really impressed me. I came across advice that really changed how I handle tough conversations, making them more manageable and constructive. The first piece of advice was to imagine a calm, quiet place away from the usual noise and chaos. It also emphasized that timing is key. You shouldn't start a deep discussion when everyone is already upset or too busy. Instead, finding a quiet time helps both people be more open and ready to talk effectively. The second tip was about getting ready for the conversation, similar to how an artist picks colors for a painting. Before you start a serious talk, it's helpful to think about what you really want to say. Figuring out your feelings and what issues you need to discuss helps keep the conversation on track. This prevents the talk from drifting off topic and makes sure important points are covered well. The third piece of advice focused on how you use words during the talk. The choice of words can make a big difference. Speaking honestly and clearly, using phrases like, "I feel hurt and confused when you say," instead of blaming with, "You always make me feel," creates an environment where both can talk openly and understand each other. It's important to keep your emotions in check throughout the conversation to keep things constructive. Lastly, after sharing feelings and concerns, the discussion should move towards finding solutions. This part is like brainstorming together, where both people work to find answers that work for everyone. This shifts the conversation from just arguing to actually working together to solve problems. Thinking back on this advice, I realize how much it has helped not just in solving issues but in building stronger relationships through respectful and understanding communication. This advice didn't just impress me, it gave me valuable skills for both personal and professional interactions.